This is Adam Taxon talking now with Richard Baehr, who is, among other things, the chief political correspondent of American Thinker, as well as for 35 years a healthcare consultant. Richard has just published a few days ago a piece called Campaign Cash from Jews is Bad Only If It Goes to Republicans, which can be found at AmericanThinker.com. This piece explains how leftists of Jewish descent are letting themselves be put in the forefront of below-the-belt attacks against rags-to-riches billionaire Sheldon Adelson, who is a major Republican donor as well as a major donor to pro-Israel and Jewish causes. Just to update you, blowback about these tactics has led, for example, to a group called the National Jewish Democratic Council, has led to them removing from its website its original very smearing petition about Adelson. Anyhow, Richard, welcome, and why don't you start off by describing the current situation?
Yeah, as far as the assault on Adelson, I think it's part of the left's great unhappiness with the Supreme Court decision in Citizens United, which from their perspective made it easier for candidates on the right to be funded because it appeared to open the door to corporate contributions. It turns out that that's basically nonsense because corporations have not been given in any significant way to any of these new super PACs, which may have been validated or legitimized by Citizens United. It's been individuals. Individuals make their money in any number of ways. Some individuals support Republicans. Those on the left, the New York Times, the NJDC, are unhappy when groups, particularly groups who they think should vote Democratic, like Jews, get off the reservation and give money in substantial ways to Republican candidates and Republican causes.
They really have in their crosshairs Adelson, who is Jewish, and the Koch brothers, who are not Jewish. But tell us a little bit more about the background of Sheldon Adelson, how he made his money, how he became a success, and also what's motivating him to be such a major Republican donor and a donor to Gingrich and now Romney.
Right. Yeah, you're correct. He really didn't become particularly successful until he was in his 50s. When he developed Comdex, which was the computer electronics show in Las Vegas, which turned out to be a huge success because it was around the time of the personal computer revolution. And he wound up selling that and made almost $1 billion, if I recall the number correctly, and reinvested that into the hotel business. He was married. He got married to an Israeli woman, and they were on a honeymoon in Venice and decided to build a Venetian hotel in Las Vegas. And in Las Vegas they already had Paris, and they had some Egyptian museums, but they didn't have the Venetian museum, so the Venetian hotel. So he built that one. Turned out to be a huge success. He's gotten into the business overseas now in China, and is one of the wealthiest people in the world, and is probably one of the largest contributors to campaigns this year.
And
the fact that he's been... Go ahead, Adam.
No, you go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, the fact that he's been public about it is, I think, what infuriates those on the left, which is kind of interesting because they've been demanding transparency. And if anyone's been transparent about contributions, it's Adelson. But they also don't like that he's sort of waving it in front of them that he can do this and make these large contributions, because it then leads them to, this wouldn't happen except for Citizens United, which is not true. Adelson is giving large amounts of money, and he could have given large amounts of money in prior cycles, just like George Soros and other contributors. The candidates on the left and causes on the left have given huge amounts of money in prior elections before Citizens United. Again, labor unions, I read an article this week, had given $4.5 billion over the last 7 years to Democratic candidates.
Yeah, no one ever cares about that, though. That's just democracy.
Right.
You mentioned China, and that sort of relates to the scope of the charges the Democrats are trying to, throw at Adelson, hoping something sticks, or hoping that people have an incomplete understanding and just think of Adelson bad and Romney bad. Can you tell us a little bit about the specifics of the charges the Democrats are going with?
Yeah, there's a disgruntled former employee who's made charges that Adelson allowed and actually used prostitution as a way to advance his business interests in Macau.
Which is legal there, too. It's legal in Macau, isn't it, also?
That I don't know. But the thing is, pretty much everyone who is in the casino business in a big way in the United States has gotten into the business in a big way in China through Macau, which is the island in which they allow it. There are all kinds of controversies surrounding pretty much everyone who's done it. And the major, most important thing is there's nothing that has been litigated. There are all kinds of accusations, all kinds of charges. Nothing has been proven about anyone or anything, and particularly accusations made by disgruntled employees are, I think, particularly suspect. But what the NJDC did, which is kind of a support group to get Jews to vote Democratic, similar in some ways to the RJC, which tries to do the same thing to get Jews to vote Republican, took this accusation by the former employee and thereby convicted Adelson of injecting dirty money from China into the presidential campaign. And they tried to say that, hey, it's not us saying this, it's John McCain. And McCain's comment wasn't anything about dirty money. It was just that Adelson's made money in China. Well, it's kind of a foolish statement by McCain, because pretty much everyone who's made money in America, who's made it in the corporate world, their business interests include countries all over the world, of which China is one of them. So if Adelson's got tainted money because it comes from China, so does everyone who's ever contributed to any other candidate on either side, including people in the movie business in Hollywood who would be contributors to Democrats.
Right, you mentioned that in your article, and you point out that there's a contrast to, say, Jeffrey Katzenberg, who, you could look at and say, oh, well, he's made some dirty money too, but suddenly the NJDC isn't so interested in that.
Right, and in fact, there are all kinds of charges surrounding whether there have been sweetheart deals and whether there's been U.S. government involvement in securing favorable terms for Katzenberg, who's the biggest single contributor so far identified, contributing to a Democratic super PAC. He's one of the biggest bundlers to the party. He and his partners, David Geffen and Steven Spielberg, have been huge contributors to the Democrats. Now, I'm not accusing them of doing anything wrong. It's just it's the same thing, but somehow when the money comes from a Jewish Republican to Republican candidates, it becomes tainted because it's somehow gotten through China, and there's some controversy about the corporations and their activities in China. Well, that seems to be the case with pretty much a lot of American companies over there, but only one gets convicted based on an argument or an accusation made by a disgruntled former employee.
Sure. And I'm sure they're offended because Judaism for thousands and thousands of years have really been about tikkun olam, gay rights, and save Darfur and whatever the trendy reform cause is of the day. Let me just ask also, what is the New York Times' role in egging all of this on?
Yeah, that's an important question, because I think one of the things that's going on now, and you're seeing it with the attacks on Romney over Bain Capital, is what I'll call the megaphone effect. You see an article in the Washington Post that accuses Romney of having been responsible for outsourcing. Quickly gets not credible 4 Pinocchios from the Washington Post's own ombudsman on these subjects. But it's immediately within a day translated into ads which are playing in Ohio and Florida and Virginia, accusing Romney of sending jobs overseas. The same thing sort of has happened here, which is New York Times ran an article about what a bad guy Adelson was, and they had an editorial about what a bad guy he is. And in both cases, of course, got in the needle about Citizens United, which is the bane of all problems. In this case, B-A-N-E, not B-A-I-N.
Thank you.
And the NJDC then takes it up a notch. And probably if there hadn't been the counter-assault, you would have seen ads about Adelson. I wouldn't have been surprised. I mean, it probably would have been the next step. But right now they're having so much fun with the Bain attacks. The latest being the Boston Globe challenging when he left the firm. I guess he was working full-time running Bain at the same time he was running the Olympics in Salt Lake City, but that's what the Boston Globe would have you believe.
There was a great exchange. Did you see John Sununu on Fox News discussing that? Just putting both on Andrea Mitchell and then Juan Williams to shame. It's become a classic virally.
NBC has become an utter embarrassment. I'm wondering whether that's one of the reasons why Microsoft is now pulling out of MSNBC. But NBC is essentially responsible for MSNBC, and their content at this point would be an embarrassment. If you thought Fox News was to the right, MSNBC is much further to the left than Fox News is to the right in terms of the percentage of their hours of broadcasting, which are really propaganda. It's a very high percentage of the day, and Andrea Mitchell is certainly part of that.
Richard, I know you've been on for a while already, but I do want to ask you about one thing because I'm in the Philadelphia area, and tomorrow night it's getting a lot of news, at least around here. Even though the Democrats have tried to suppress it, they're doing a Jews for Barack Obama event in the Philadelphia suburbs, in which they're basically violating the tax exempt status blatantly and bringing in Debbie Wasserman Schultz and a local politician and state representative named Josh Shapiro, and of course Allison Wasserman Schwartz, as I like to call her, will also be there to tell Jews how great Barack Obama is for them. And there's rumors that they're trying to bar certain people from coming in, as they did at a similar event in Florida. Could you just discuss the whole situation with that?
Yeah, it's a very makes me very uncomfortable, and it should make, I think, people at the synagogue very uncomfortable. It's not uncommon for a synagogue to invite their elected officials in to speak. And if it's during a campaign season, they'll also offer equal time, usually at a separate event, for the opposing candidate. And if the shul is a largely Democratic majority, which is fine, more people show up for one event than the other.
Right.
But to actually have an event which you could really characterize in no other way but as a campaign event, not an informational event with an elected official, in this case bringing in the head of the Democratic National Committee from Florida, to make a case on behalf of the sitting president, and potentially barring people who might be, they'll call it disruptive, but really just having an alternative point of view that they might challenge or question the speaker. That simply flies in the face of the kind of organization that's got a 501c3 tax exemption and is not allowed to engage in politics.
Do you think anything will result from it, or everyone will just forget about it a few hours later, and the opponent of Joe Rooney, the opponent of Allison Wasserman Schwartz, will take a lot of picture of Schwartz and Schultz together?
Well, I think in this particular administration, any particular complaint filed with the Internal Revenue Service is unlikely to get much attention between now and November. If they get away with it, I'm sure they'll do it in other locations, where they are concerned about swing states like Columbus, Ohio, Cleveland, and so on.
Yeah, well, Wasserman Schultz is not exactly popular, it seems, also. So it may be something they want to question whether they do.
Yeah, I mean, she may be popular with people other than us.
Right. I mean, but the middle, no, absolutely not. Yeah. If no one is already not convinced.
Among Jewish liberals, my guess is she's probably still seen as something of a warrior leading the charge.
Yeah, and I guess it gets people to write checks. All right, any final thoughts on these general issues, Richard?
Yeah, just you're going to see, I think, a really dirty campaign from here on out, and this is what happens when you have an incumbent who really has no record to run on. So it becomes a sort of an important effort on his part to smear the other guy and identify him and make sure people know what the Democrats want people to think about him before he gets a chance, at the convention and elsewhere, to introduce himself to voters. So I hope Romney gets a little less passive, because I think these attacks are hurting him.
We all do. Richard Baehr from American Thinker, thanks for your time.